Mr. Kahale is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mahalo, Secretary Kendall, General Brown, General Raymond for being here today, for your leadership of our United States Air Force. Secretary Kendall, you approved the legislative proposal that was sent to Congress this month to combine active duty and reserve components into a U.S. Space Force with full-time and part-time members, effectively canceling any plans for an Air National Guard component of the Space Force. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct.
Well, Mr. Secretary, this is particularly concerning to me. Dismantling Air National Guard space units would immediately degrade operational readiness that would take about 7 years to regrow and cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, in Hawaii, this decision would displace approximately 50 airmen currently assigned to the Hawaii Space Unit and a total planned force structure of 88 members of the 293rd Space Control Squadron located at the Pacific Missile Range facility on Kauai. How much would it cost the Department of Defense and the Space Force to establish this new active duty capability as outlined in this legislative proposal?
The proposal does not do away with any existing force structure. It changes the way we manage the reserve and the active component of the Space Force. The guardsmen, the Air Guard people who are supporting the Space Force now will continue to do so. They are very valuable assets, and we do not want to lose them. They're critical to the space mission. What we're discussing is how they're labeled and what kind of an organizational construct they fit into. The concern the administration has is that the overhead cost of creating a new independent Space Guard as an entity would be significant. And that's the reason that the administration has opposed the creation of a Space Guard writ large. There are a number of ways I think we can solve this problem, but at the end of the day, what we need is to keep those people in uniform and to keep them doing what they are doing, whether they're called Air Guard or Space Guard or something else. That's the end state we want. And we're happy to work with the Congress as we try to find a way forward to make that happen. I'd like to give General Raymond a chance to...
Well, I believe the Space National Guard would provide a seamless surge capacity for the Space Force while capturing the training and talent of active duty Space Force personnel who move to the private sector and want to continue their service in the National Guard. So, General Raymond, using your best military advice, do you think we should or should not have a Space National Guard?
We've been operating with the Guard for 25 years. They provide critical capability and provide great personnel. As our Secretary said, there's multiple ways you can do this. You can have a separate Space National Guard. You can utilize the Air National Guard to continue doing what we're doing today, or you can take those capabilities out of the Guard and put them into this active duty reserve combined. There's multiple ways you can do it, but the key is, as the Secretary said, is the guardsmen and women that are in the space business and the capabilities they operate, we rely on today, and we're going to rely on them in the future.
You know, Congress has made, CBO has made incorrect assumptions regarding the size and scope of a Space National Guard. In its cost estimates, which yielded a cost estimate of $100 million in annual operation and support costs and a one-time construction cost of $20 million. It's why Congressman Crow and I sent a letter to CBO asking them to rescore the cost of establishing a Space National Guard because the cost should be minimal. Those same personnel that General Raymond you just talked about will continue to execute their missions within the Space National Guard at the same duty stations, so no new construction is needed. From a cost perspective, why should we go forward with this policy when we already have the talent within the Air National Guard to train, deploy, and provide critical space capability for the Space Force using existing infrastructure? General Raymond.
Today there's about 839 guardsmen in the Air National Guard that support the Space Force. 839 in 8 states and 1 territory. Again, they provide critical capability for us. And again, there's multiple ways you can do this. And there's different costs associated with each one of those ways, but there's multiple ways you can do it. The critical piece of this, though, is that we rely on them today, and we're going to have to rely on them in the future.
Secretary Kendall, Congress has requested multiple reports on the value and feasibility of establishing a Space National Guard. Any idea why the Congress hasn't received these reports submitted to the Congress on the value and feasibility of establishing a Space National Guard?
The short answer is I don't know. We should be able to provide you with information. I'm not sure why that hasn't happened. Now, I know you know what the administration's position is, obviously, on this, and it's a fairly firm position, but it is based on concerns about overhead and cost. And again, we'd be happy to have a dialogue with you and try to find a solution that was mutually acceptable that gets us what we all want, which is to keep these people in uniform and serving their country.
Thank you for your answers. Mahalo, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the remaining balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, my district is home to Barksdale Air Force Base, and I had a great meeting a couple weeks ago with Acting Assistant Secretary Oshiba there at the Pentagon to discuss our new entrance road and gate complex that's been in the works for some time at Barksdale. Just last week, my office was informed that the Air Force plans to award the contract for that project by the end of next month, May. Can you confirm that timeline for the contract award?
That's my understanding also.
Very good. Shifting gears quickly to the F-35 program, it's my understanding that over 10 years ago, the Department and Congress determined that a second engine for the F-35 was costly and unnecessary. But this year's budget, of course, requests nearly $300 million to recreate a second engine program at the expense of F-35 quantities, funds to modernize the current engine and NGAD propulsion. So what changes are driving that push for this second F-35 engine?
Congressman, it's not a second F-35 engine. It's a completely new and much improved F-35 engine, potentially. It's a technology that was in very early stages of development when I first saw it in 2010 that has matured fairly well. Offers the opportunity for on the order of 20-25% cost savings or mission range improvement. So it's a substantial improvement and would be a replacement for the current engine, not a second one. There's a over $6 billion, I think, development cost associated with getting that engine completely developed and into production. So we're looking at that. We're funding the development this year, the next increment, but it's going to have to compete in our budget for those resources going forward. But it would be a substantial improvement over the current capability.
And what would be the timeline to develop and test and integrate and field that?
We're a few years away from having a fully developed engine. There's a substantial development program ahead of us.
I guess the question we have is, wouldn't it make more sense to focus investment on the next generation air dominance program rather than drastically modify a fighter program that's already plagued by delays?
Well, the ATP engine would offer increased power, which we're going to need as we continue to modernize the F-35. The F-35 is going to be the cornerstone of our fleet. We're going to have, a very large inventory of F-35s. So the fuel savings that we could accomplish through that engine would be a significant payoff. So again, it's a cost-benefit analysis. There's some good operational reasons to do it. There are also some good reasons from the point of view of climate change to do it, and just from operational efficiency, energy efficiency to do it. But again, it's going to have to compete with other things in our budget going forward.
So in addition to the lower F-35 procurement, this year's budget proposes ending the F-15EX procurement at 80 aircraft. There's been some discussion about that today. Mm-hmm. As a result, it seems likely that some units around the country and overseas that operate under the older F-15C and D models are just not going to get replacement aircraft. Is that an accurate assessment? And if so, what's the plan for all those airmen?
We were talking about the fighter mix earlier, and we're also talking about other missions that are coming into existence, cyber missions, for example, information warfare missions. So it's not correct to think about this as a one-for-one replacement that has to happen. The older F-15Cs are going to have to come out of the inventory at some point, but we need to think about it much more broadly than just fighters for fighters. It's a bigger equation than that.
But the commitment is, or I guess the focus would be not to have idle airmen, right? They will have something to do, right? Yes.
That's our intention, yes.
Got it. Okay. I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Carvajal is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Brief question to start to General Raymond in light of the upcoming NDAA, so I and others could better prepare. I wanted to ask, what is the status of the range of the future report required in Section 1610 of fiscal year 22 NDAA? I believe this is due at the end of this month. Just wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I've reviewed it, and I think we'll meet our timelines. It's been drafted.
Do you have any sense when it might come out?
It'll meet the timelines.
Oh, it will. Great. Thank you so much. I think my colleague, Representative Cajela, has already touched on the establishing or standing up of a separate space National Guard component. I just want to associate myself with his comments, Secretary, so you're aware of my personal sentiments as well. Secretary Kendall, last week I had the privilege of welcoming Vice President Harris and General Raymond to my district for their visit to Vandenberg Space Force Base. Vice President Harris announced during her visit that the United States commits not to conduct destructive direct ascent anti-satellite ASAT missile testing, and that the United States seeks to establish this as a new international norm for responsible behavior in space. The Vice President also called on other nations to make similar commitments and to work together to establishing this as a norm. With this announcement and commitment, what are our next steps to make this an internationally adhered norm? And how are we engaging China and Russia on this issue?
That would not be a responsibility of the Department of the Air Force, although we'd support it. It would be a State Department-led, I would assume, initiative with defense in support again. I'm not aware of, but we can get for the record perhaps any existing plans. The National Space Council is very interested in this too, that the Vice President chairs. So I think there will be an effort to move this forward and try to get other nations to sign up, but I'm not intimately aware of what the exact plans are.
Thank you. Continuing on, Secretary Kendall, in February, the Army published its climate strategy outlining how the service intends to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Is the Air Force working on a similar strategy? And if so, when can we expect to see it published?
We have been working on a similar strategy, and there are elements of it which we are executing now. We're monitoring the Arctic carefully. We're working with our partners in that region. We're concerned about deterrence in that area. And we're concerned about our capabilities in that area. The initial draft of that strategy I looked at and I wasn't satisfied with it, quite frankly. And so we're trying to do something which is more forceful and more action-oriented than the original draft was. I can't give you a date at this point in time, but I hope to have something published in the near future.
Thank you. And General Raymond, I just want to thank you for always being so responsive and attentive to the issues, concerns, needs, and challenges of Vandenberg Space Force Space. Thank you very much. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Green is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding the hearing. Of course, thanks to our witnesses. Thanks for your life of service to the country. The DoD and the Department of the Air Force are rightfully pivoting to the global war on terror, from the global war on terror to the current threat posed by Russia and China. However, I have some significant concerns about the vulnerabilities for divesting platforms. I'm sure you've heard it already today. That provide significant combat capability before the sustainable replacement is ready and fielded. And as I told General Milley during our recent defense-wide budget hearing, I'm specifically concerned about the loss of JSTARS and AWACS. The Biden administration seems to be removing critical instruments from our toolkit. The plan is to stop funding these critical capabilities now and simply hope for new and more lethal and cost-effective replacements to roll out seamlessly. This budget diverts already scarce defense dollars into searching for replacement systems, leaving an extensive capabilities gap while a land war rages in Europe. The divestiture of these critical systems is occurring, I think, far too rapidly, and it's time for Congress to adequately fund the transition from legacy systems to their replacements. And I think there's also a mechanism out there. I've met with Representative Whitman, who sits a little further up on the dais than I, and he advised me about a formerly created and still authorized Naval Strategic Deterrence Fund. It could be a mechanism where we can put extra dollars there to cover the legacy systems and our ramp up of new systems so that the DoD budget top line can work for those members of both the administration and the Congress who want to see that the main budget stays flatline, much like we did the OCO over the years of the war on terror. Does that make sense? Am I making sense on that, how we would use those funds? We've already talked about inflation and things like that. I won't go into that. What I really want to ask today is if we put a working group together and got some Democrats on board with this, and would you guys be interested in working with that group for how we might be able to use this Naval Strategic Deterrence Fund that, again, has already been authorized by Congress to address the potential of the legacy systems coming out too soon? Would y'all be interested in putting people to help us with this working group?
I think what you're referring to is a fund that essentially separately funded the strategic deterrence, so
Yes.
that it didn't have the effect that it has on our budget. In our case, we have fully funded in our budget request, and we'll continue to do so, the strategic deterrent. I think that's a position the
Well, there's-
administration has taken.
There's apparently a
we
fund
don't
separate
just-
of DOD's budget. This is a fund that's separate of DOD budget, very much similar to the OCO. You'll recall we kind of abused that a little bit, stuck some stuff in the OCO in order to keep the budget flatline, the DOD budget flatline, and that helps people on both sides, particularly other parts of the country where being able to say we didn't, necessarily raise DOD's budget. There's the potential that we could keep legacy systems around a little longer, fund it through this. Your top line budget stays the same, and yet those systems stick around a little longer until the other systems are fully funded. And I'm just wondering if y'all are interested in that dialogue, and if you could loan us somebody with some ideas on that.
I'm going to have to decline for now, and the reason is that these ideas basically create a different way to count the money, but it's still the money, and we still have to spend what we have to spend on national security. It's a fact of history that we made a big investment in the strategic deterrent decades ago, and then we lived off of that capital for a long time, and now we're having to recapitalize.
Sure, so I understand that comment, but what I want to be able to make sure, and what you all will be held very much accountable to, is the capability of our force. And as those legacy systems come down, that capabilities gap can't be there. And that's what I'm asking for you to work with members of both sides of the aisle to kind of think through what we can do in terms of making sure that those legacy systems are around long enough until the new stuff replacing that capability gets in the field.
We're open to new ideas always, but I think our budget request does accommodate a reasonable balance of current and future capabilities and fund the strategic deterrent. So I think we're asking for the money we need to do what we think is necessary.
You're asking for everything you need. There's nothing else you would need.
We have a balanced and I think a reasonable request that will implement the national defense.
Fair enough. We're going to continue the dialogue about it here, but we may have questions then in future testimony about it. Thank you both, and thanks for your service to our great country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. McClain is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I'm proud to note that Selfridge Air National Guard Base in my district is home to 21 A-10s aircraft on the 127th Fighter Wing. These uniquely capable aircraft have proven themselves time after time in every major conflict in the U.S. Has engaged in since the first Gulf War, saving countless lives while delivering battlefield-altering close air support. And in part, due to their high utilization, A-10 aircraft have not had their wings replaced previously and are rapidly beginning to time out on their original wings. We've talked about that. Wing replacement for this aircraft is essential. Indeed, about half of the aircraft on Selfridge right now requires new wings. I'm highly concerned that the President's FY23 budget request does not provide the funding for additional wing sets, as notes that the Air Force has procured enough wings for only a fleet of 218. So it looks like in the budget, FY2022's budget was for 280 wing replacements. And then this year's budget, say that 3 times fast, then in this year's budget, it talks about replacing 260. There's enough for 260, yet it's only going to replace 218. So I guess what is the true A-10 divestment target for 2023? Is it 260 or is it 218?
It's 260, but in previous budget we had funded 218 of the wing kits already, and we're on the path to fund more. I think that it's a balance between where we are today and where we're headed. But 218 is what we had in last year's budget for the wing kits, and then we're going down from 281 to 260 in this budget.
But we're only, of those 260 that we want to maintain, I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right because the math isn't working in my brain. We want to keep 260 active, right?
In this fiscal year.
In this fiscal year.
FY23, excuse me.
Correct. Yet we only have money to keep 218 active. Am I reading that right?
218 will get we funded 218 wing kits that will be put on 218 A-10s.
But we have two. Do we only have 218 that need replaced?
Depends on how many A-10s we keep over the FIDF. I mean, this is what balance is coming down from 281 to a lower number. And we don't want to buy more wing kits than we're going to need if we're going to start retiring A-10s.
So we really only have 218 A-10s that are available to fly, or is it 260?
We'll have 260 because they'll fly with their existing wings.
Right.
Okay,
They won't have the
so
wings
the
replaced.
difference is okay. They don't
Yeah.
need the wing replacement.
They still have life left on them.
They still have life left on. Okay. My final question is, what does the Air Force plan to do with the retired aircraft when it gets retired?
Typically, we do with the aircraft is we take them out to our boneyard at Davis-Monthan, and we store them there. And then we can use them for parts, or in some cases, we'll bring them back into the fleet for certain airplanes. So potentially.
Do we ever foresee selling them to recoup some, maybe to our
In some-
allies?
in
Is
some
that
cases-
an option as well?
In some cases, we do that based on the airplane and based on the request of our allies and partners.
Okay, very good. Thank you, gentlemen. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Carl is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Kendall, thank you for stopping by yesterday and chit-chatting with me. I appreciate your time. I know how valuable it truly is, so thank you. But I do want to talk about the possibility of the KCY not being brought up in a competitive situation coming up. You and I had this conversation. I promised you I wouldn't throw you under the bus, and I won't. But it is really a sore point. I'd like to point out a couple of things before I get you to do that. You know, competition, we both agreed, is a good thing. It truly is. But when you get a competition and someone wins a low bid, I think they should deliver that product at that price on that time frame. And on this plane, it is not there. We're behind schedule. I think now, according to my notes, we're told that these planes will be 100% ready by 2024. And I'm not holding you to that. I'm just reading my notes here. So 2024, but right now we're flying with a plane that can only refuel 78% of our fleet. But yet we are refueling in behind the LMXT in the Europeans, in the Europe countries at 100%. Now I'm arguing the point, obviously, that we should open up the bid for the LMXT so they can be bid against this KCY aircraft. And I can't understand why the Air Force, I mean, the Air Force has already started the propaganda. They've started throwing the little stories out, letting us know that they're not going to bid it out. They're not going to bid it out. But I go back to my same old country roots. Would you really buy a car knowing you could only drive it 78% of the time?
Thanks, Congressman, and enjoyed the conversation also. Thank you for that yesterday. General Brown may want to help me with this, but the current situation is that the KC-46 can service about 85% of the types of aircraft that it has to service. The only things that we don't have that I'm aware of are the A-10 and I think certain C-130s. And there may be others as well. But the vast majority of our tankers, fighters, and bombers, it can provide fuel to. And we've moved far from where we were a year ago or so when we could only do the F-18. So we're getting to where we need to be on the KC-46. That said, if competition's the right thing to do, and I love competition, I'm all for it. It's the best tool we have to reduce cost. But we actually have to have a demand for the other aircraft that's being offered in this case, a requirement for it. And the Air Mobility Command is working on its requirements for the aircraft that would follow the current contracted buy, basically, of KC-46. And I'm trying to be as transparent and honest about this as I can be. It is not as certain as it was a year ago, let's say, that we were going to do a competition. And I don't want people to have a misimpression about that. We have not made a final decision yet. I've had Lockheed in and talked to them. I'm aware of their design. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions before we make a final decision about this. So it's not done yet, but I'm just letting people know that the probability of it being a competition is diminished from what it was a year ago.
Well, it disturbs me when you see an aircraft company, quote unquote, win at lowest bid and they don't deliver it on time. Now I'm reading an article that's on Twitter now that Boeing has come out and said that they wish they would never bid Air Force One because there's $660 million in the hole. That's not the taxpayer's responsibility. We paid for a product and we want it delivered. I don't care. I do care that the companies lose money. Don't get me wrong. I think the process itself is where the real problem's at. The lowest bidder, gets it, make them deliver it. And that's what I'm talking about here. We've got an aircraft that we can refuel from 100% of the time. This may say 2024, but what's it going to, we get to 2024, is it going to move to 2026? Is it going to move to 28? We have no way of knowing because this plane should have been delivered 100% when? In 2018? 2017?
The original production aircraft should have met our requirements, and they did not.
Okay, so that's 5 or 6
Boeing
years
is operating
behind.
on a fixed price contract. They've lost $5 or $6 billion already.
Well, they've lost money, but we label that as upgrades. But the truth is, it's the design issues that they've losing money on. It was designed wrong. They don't have night vision. They couldn't refuel with the stick that they had. Pardon my terminology. And I'm about to run out of time. But real quickly, I'd like to make sure you understand also the selection of Huntsville, the site for the Space Force, I think was right then, and I think it's right now. And I really would appreciate y'all looking very strongly and keep it that. With that said, Mr. Speaker, thank you for your time.
Mr. Franklin is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Secretary Kendall, I apologize in advance if you've touched on this because I think I heard you engaging with Mr. Banks as I was coming in the room about divestment. I have more questions about the divestment. As you're aware, in last year's NDAA, the Senate blocked the divestment of 42 A-10 aircraft. It's my understanding, and that's what I want to get your thoughts on, the inability to divest of those A-10s would potentially prohibit the bed down of F-35 squadrons at Kendall. I don't know if those decisions were linked or not. But with a couple of questions regarding the A-10s, did the inability to divest those A-10s last year have implications on the Air Force's fifth generation fighter capability?
It has, and we're still trying to figure out how to react to that. The maintainers who were doing the A-10s that we had planned to retire were going to be retrained and go to F-35s. Okay. And now because they still have to do A-10, we're not able to do that. There are several hundred people that are affected by this, so we're trying to find another solution to that problem.
Okay. Well, what is the status currently of the bed down of the F-35 squadrons at Kendall?
I think it's on hold until we can resolve this problem. Security, you have any?
Yeah, we're going to have to delay a little bit because it's about, if I have my numbers correct, it's about 950 maintainers that was in the plan from last year to make that transition. So we are, as the Secretary described, looking at some other options on how we harvest the 950 maintainers that would actually get this back on track.
And as was mentioned earlier, that's not an instant flip of the switch. Will those be A-10 trained personnel that will be switching over to the new platform, or?
It's a combination, and it's a matter of as our airmen PCS and move, we'll have experience levels, and we'll be able to move some of those airmen. Some of them will come from where they work on A-10. They may come from other airplanes, but it's being able to move those airmen around, but having the flexibility is the key part, to be able to have them available to transition from one aircraft to the other.
Roger that, thanks. Secretary Kendall, continuing on this divestment theme, this year's proposed budget calls for the divestment of 33 F-22s, which, as I think my math is right, about a sixth of the total F-22 fleet. We all know how important fifth-gen fighters are to our great power competition that we're trying to re-equip for, coming out of 20 years in the Gulf. But can you expand on the potential implications of this divestment of fifth-gen aircraft, which we don't have enough of already?
That's essentially an efficiency move for us. We're taking out the Block 20, the oldest F-22s. They're less combat capable and would not probably be employed against a high-end threat. It would cost prohibitively to upgrade them, about $50 million per aircraft. And they're used for training now. And what we can do is we can substitute fully combat capable aircraft and use them for training with the ability to deploy those aircraft if we needed to. So it's going to be an efficiency saving that will not significantly impact our combat capability.
Okay. But we're still re-winging Vietnam-era aircraft that clearly aren't going to play a role in a war against some of these potential adversaries. Okay, so that answers that question. Are there any other legacy aircraft divestments that could allow us to continue funding and flying these? And you're saying it's cost prohibitive. It's really not. If you had the money, you'd invest it somewhere else besides these aircraft. So there's nothing you can do software-wise or anything. The airframes themselves are just too far gone to make it worthwhile, even in a training capacity.
I'm supporting the budget that we requested. Quite frankly, though, if I had more money to spend in the Department of the Air Force, it might not go to airplanes at all. It might go to things like munitions, electronic warfare, and information security.
Well, you know, it's been an age-old problem of trying to fight like you train like you fight. It's hard as a fifth-generation fighter to go out and train. We don't want to use these frontline assets to train against one another and expend them in that sense. What role do you see, or do you see a greater role for using virtual and augmented reality on training ranges to try to avoid putting hours on these airframes that are so critical?
Well, we want to train our F-22 pilots on the same aircraft they actually would use in combat. So this will improve their training in that regard. But we do try to do a mix of simulators as well as live training to get the optimal mix from a cost-effectiveness point of view.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Bice is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here this afternoon. We're now at afternoon. First of all, Secretary Kendall, I want to say thank you for the inclusion of the $30 million in the Air Force budget to acquire the needed real estate at Tinker Air Force Base for the forthcoming B-21 Depot Maintenance Campus. That's incredibly important to my district and certainly critical to national security, so I appreciate you including that. My question, as may be expected, has to do with the E3, and divestiture seems to be a hot topic in this hearing today. I want to talk about the proposed divestiture of the 15 E3 Center aircraft in the budget proposal. I was incredibly pleased to see that the official announcement that the E-7s would be the replacement aircraft for the E-3. However, there is a concern that I have as it relates to divesting those 15 aircraft before we ever even have a contract signed to move forward on the E-7. So my question is, Secretary Kendall or General Brown, what is the estimated cost savings associated with the divestiture of the E-3s on a per year and a per aircraft basis?
If I have the numbers correctly, I think by the end of the fit-up, we save $1 billion a year.
$1 billion?
Yeah. And it increments as you go out and you accumulate more savings over time.
Great.
But I think it gets to that. I'd like to confirm that for the record, but I believe that's about right. A little bit less than $1 billion.
Great. Can you tell me if the savings associated with the divestiture will be applied to the procurement of the E-7s? Will the savings from the E-3s be applied to the acquisition of the E-7s?
It isn't a direct one-for-one correlation, but you can look at it that way if you choose to. And if, in effect, the money that's saved goes into, we don't do a one-for-one swap of money that way.
But if I'm saving you $1 billion bucks,
net savings, and we try to make the investments that we need to do.
Okay. What can Congress do to move up the delivery of the E-7s? Currently, it is my understanding that we're looking at, if we were to sign a contract, we're looking at an FY27 delivery date. And if you're looking at divesting those 15 of the 31 aircraft, we don't have capabilities for quite some time. So what can we do to speed that up?
I would like to accelerate that delivery if possible. I'm not sure at this point it's possible. We have about $225 million, if I remember correctly, in the budget for R&D in 23 for the E-7. We're going to have to make some changes to the aircraft to meet our requirements. I am exploring options to try to accelerate those deliveries, because I'd like to do that if we can. I'm just not sure it's possible right now.
Can you elaborate on why you think that's not possible?
The modifications that might have to be made and the time it takes to do the engineering and implement those, and then where we are in the production line in terms of being able to get aircraft. I think we start production, if I remember correctly, in 25 and get delivery in 27. And so to accelerate that, there are some things that would have to happen to make that possible. And I'm not sure they can be done right now.
I want to quickly just say I had a great meeting with Colonel Coyle last week at Tinker Air Force Base to discuss the divestiture and maybe walk through some of the details of that. And I want to say that I appreciated his perspective and insight into what he's looking at and the challenges that he sees currently with this entry and why this E-7 procurement is important. But I am 100% for your deal. We need to speed it up, and whatever I can do to make that happen, I'm happy to work with the Air Force in making that a reality. I want to pivot quickly to The Retrained Skilled Veterans Act, which my colleague Blake Moore has filed. I've been working closely with him, and this legislation would make permanent the ability for retiring service members to pursue positions at the GS-13 level or below without having to comply with the 180-day cooling off period. With significant workforce challenges that we're seeing across the nation today, I think the urgency of securing the permanence of this policy is very evident. Secretary Kendall and General Brown, could you discuss the current waiver of the 180-day rule and how it benefits the Department of Defense's workforce needs?
I'm not familiar with that issue, but I'm sympathetic to anything that increases our flexibility. We're finding difficulties at hiring, the length of time it takes and so on. We're not as competitive as we should be with the commercial world, with the outside market. So anything that relaxes some of those constraints would be of interest to me. A lot of these constraints are put in place to prevent abuse. I think abuses tend to be very rare, and the constraints are always present. And so I think we need to look at these much more carefully, and I'd be happy to have a conversation about that with you.
General, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the specific legislation, but I agree with the Secretary. The faster we can get talent on board, the better, because otherwise we might lose it if they have to wait too long.
Okay, thank you. My time has expired. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Moore for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the gentlelady from Oklahoma, Ms. Bice, for asking my questions for me. Thank you. General Brown and Secretary Kendall, I want to continue to talk about the 180-day rule. A little concerned you're not familiar enough with the legislation. We will make sure that we communicate that directly to you, but many in your ranks are very familiar with it and very supportive of it. Broad support across the entire Air Force. So again, I hail from the 1st District of Utah, where we're an Air Force district. Second largest, Hill Air Force Base, second largest installation, the 388th, first operational wing of the F-35, and the newly named, which we're very excited about the new name, the Sentinel program, the ground-based strategic deterrent. Because of this, we're so focused on our depot work, and we want to be able to have the flexibility. Again, the 180-day rule is crucial to be able to make sure we have the workforce needs that we, as GS-13 and below in particular, that will reduce any potential issues or abuses that would ever come from something like this, and it helps us immediately hire and keep our workforce going. As you mentioned, you're not necessarily familiar with the legislation. Any other comments now that we have a little bit more time to just talk about, the need for this? I'll throw it to General Brown first. Making sure that, we want to have full support for this particular piece, and are you okay if we provide your office with detailed updates on this particular issue?
I'd be very interested in that. You're bringing back memories. In 1982, I was a captain in the Army, and over a weekend I came back to work as the GS-13. And I didn't have to wait 180 days. And I think it would have been great discouragement to me if I had to do that. So I'd be very interested in looking at this legislation.
Well, we provided, there's a waiver that's been in existence for a while. And we've had long enough to look at the data and say, this should be the status quo. We've got to we remove this bureaucratic piece and make this and change this into law. We keep making incremental inches forward every time we have an NDAA cycle, and we need to address that this year. We need to be data-driven individuals from our side, on the Congress side, from the DoD, and say, let's embrace this. Let's go. The unions are great with this. The workers want this. Our defense depots desperately need this type of workforce. We know that it's a shortage across our entire economy, but particularly with this. Let me jump over to the Depot Caucus. So I chair the Depot Caucus, and we recently held an event with the Army to provide them the opportunity to brief members on the Army, the OIB modernization plan. Many of my colleagues, particularly those of us with air logistic complexes, ALCs, are waiting for the Air Force's 5-year optimization plan, and was supposed to be submitted alongside the budget. Can we expect, Secretary Kendall, can we expect to see this soon? Could you preview its specific goals that are associated with FY23?
Yeah, overall, the 5-year plan is what's reflected in our 5-year development plan. I think we're working on a 20-year organic and industrial base plan as well. You know, I don't have the specifics in my head, but I'd be happy to get with you and talk to you about that.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of work on the Army side. This is a win-win. This is a win. We have bipartisan members on the Depot Caucus from various districts with Army, Navy, Air Force bases, and we are really anxious from the Air Force side to be able to get the plan so we can get working on this and make sure that we can implement it. Lastly, General Brown, from my understanding, JASM and LRASM and the stand-in attack weapon can help the F-35 reach its full potential as a 5th-generation fighter. Can you please provide an update on the implementation of advanced weaponry for the F-35 with battle management capabilities needed to address increasing adversarial threats?
Sure, particularly on JASM and LRASM, because they're basically built from the same body. We're maxing out production in this particular budget. And that's an important aspect of the capability, not just the airplane, as I've said earlier, the weapons as well. And then we're also putting money into an RTD&E for stand-in attack weapon to provide that capability for the F-35 as well. So those are two key. I'd also highlight JATM, the Joint Air Tactical Missile, is another aspect that we want to continue to develop, give us the air-to-air range as well.
Excellent. Thank you both. We'll follow up on the 180-day legislation. Make sure you have clear copies of it.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Fallon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. General Brown, how are you? Thank you all for coming. I wanted to start real quickly on, I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but just general on a personal level. As an Air Force veteran myself, very proud. I love all 4 branches of the service. I just love the Air Force a little bit more. I was dismayed last year when I believed it was politically driven, that some were alleging that there was a major problem with extremism in the military. I mean, you're always going to have some bad apples, but I took that as an affront, because there's a difference between truth and then deliberate fiction. And that's why, I just remember my experience. And the first thing they did when we got on station was, this is a meritocracy. We don't put up, and we have zero tolerance for any kind of bigotry, any kind of discrimination. And we loved that. It's America. And the Air Force and the military have been on the cutting edge. I think in advance and further than our society had gotten. I think have been leading. That was 30 years ago. I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect it's getting even better. So one of the questions that we asked each branch was, because I want to deal with truth and data, how many folks have been separated in the last fiscal year, due to extremist activities? And some of the other branches got us an answer. The Air Force heed and hawed, and they didn't give us an answer, but they finally said, well, we don't track that. So I was just wondering if you track it now, and if you don't, I would respectfully ask if you should, because I just want to deal with truth. So if somebody says that again, I can say, what are you talking about? Of the 330,000 active, it was 4 or 5, and that's not it's an issue. One's too many, but it's not a serious issue. So I just wanted you to comment on that real quickly. Thank you.
I appreciate you asking the question. We'll have to get back to you. I know of a couple, personally, I know of that have been removed from the service based on extremism or extreme activities. But what I will tell you, a good majority of airmen all live up to our core values.
Amen.
And that's exactly what it's all about. And it's the aspect of, we don't want any one of our airmen, or our guardians for that matter, any other service member, to feel like they're being either harassed, discriminated, or live in an environment they can't reach their full potential. And
that's not unit cohesion, and we want them out. We want the bad apples out. I remember an instance, it was more sexism, but they kicked his butt out, within a few weeks after he graduated, basically while he was in tech training. So, but if just tracking it, then we can, if some yo-yos here, waste your time with something like that, we can have a ready answer. And if it is an issue, then we'll address it. I just want to move forward. So, General, with recruiting and retention, our office asked on the 13th of April of this month, what the Air Force recruiting was for, the basic training graduates and, Air Force officers commissioned. And we haven't got an answer yet. So I'd love to have that answer at some point. It's been 2 weeks. But I did notice that FY22 we had 329,000 in strength, and then FY23 planning on 323. So it's a reduction of almost 2%. When you think about nuclearized Iran, of course the largest land invasion we've seen in Europe in 70 years, and a resurgent China, what's the rationale and the reasoning behind the reduction?
That in-strength reduction is tied to force structure. And so one of the things we're doing is actually making sure we're aligning what we're doing from a force structure standpoint with our in-strength. So those are tied together.
Okay.
And,
thank you. Secretary Kendall, with the pilots, I think we have, it's 12,451 and our strength is 14. We want 14,101, so there's a delta there. What are our plans to remedy that?
Yeah, we're looking at things that increase the efficiency of the pipeline, produce pilots, and we're trying to recruit more and bring them in. You know, we don't have an operational shortage of pilots and flying units. What we have is a shortage of rated people in staff jobs generally, so it's not really affecting readiness that much. But we are making incremental progress. I think the pilot shortfall fell by about 300 this past year. So we're making some progress on that, and we're doing a number of things to address that problem.
Yeah, because I remember my PAS when I was in ROTC telling me in the 70s after Vietnam, they let a bunch of pilots go, and then a couple years later they had a shortage. And then we're seeing that in the early 90s where they were banking pilots and letting folks go, and then what happened? And he predicted it too. He said, you're going to have a shortage, and we did. I just don't want to see that. I want to learn from that history.
We're having some difficulties with recruiting in general, not just pilots right now.
Yeah, and that's why I asked for those about, I'm worried about that because I'm hearing that from people at Lackland. I'm hearing that from people in some of the bases with the Army as well. General, the RC-135 Rivet Joint Platform, we make that in Greenville, Texas. It's in the district that I currently represent, but won't back come January. But I just wanted, I know that we're in an unclassified setting, but I was wondering if you could comment on the contributions to our efforts to support Ukraine and our NATO allies vis-a-vis this platform.
Well, it's not just the RC-135, it's all the other ISR platforms that come together to help provide information, not only to ourselves to have a good sense of what's going on, but to support Ukraine in their operations as well. So the RC-135, having been an air component commander a couple of times and having to operate personally for me and the things I have to do as an air component commander, provides some pretty great capability to give us a good sense of what's going on within whatever environment we're monitoring.
Members' time has expired.
Thank you. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for sticking with us today. I certainly think the American people deserve our close attention here. I'm struggling, and Mr. Kendall, thank you for the call. Thank you all for the engagement. I'm still struggling to figure out how this budget builds and maintains an Air Force that can meet the National Defense Strategy. How it, Mr. Kendall, we've received some briefings from you. Thank you. We've received the overmatch brief. That essentially, if we buy into the notion that the Chinese Communist Party believes it has match or overmatch in the next 5 years, coupled with still deterring Russia, coupled with Iran, North Korea, and keeping a lid on global terrorism, how this budget gets us there. I mean, I'll be candid. I think we need to raise the DoD top line. We're going backwards with inflation. The comptroller used a 4% figure. We're sitting at 8%. And therefore raise the Air Force top line to be able to both accelerate modernization and enable legacy retirement recapitalization by reprogramming recapitalization that preserves the combat capability, because we don't know if and when the next Ukraine is going to happen or the next Taiwan or what have you. And I'm, as you've heard from many members, very concerned about this dip that we constantly seem to be in as we divest to invest. Secretary Kendall, I'm particularly concerned about readiness. We talked about it briefly. The Air Force's budget continues to take risk, particularly in weapon system sustainment accounts. It's funded at 83% of the requirement. If you add in your unfunded priority list requests at about $500 million, that raises it to 87%, but we're still trading near-term readiness for long-term modernization. We're still in that dip. And I can't figure out why you aren't coming to us and saying, this is what I truly need, and here's the risks that we're taking. But yesterday when we spoke, you thought it was adequate. You thought it gets the job done. And I think we have a teachable moment right now in Ukraine on how you can have the shiniest, newest, most modern toys, but if they're not ready, if they're not sustained, then at least Russia right now is feeling that pain, and I don't ever want to see us feel it. So talk to me about readiness, particularly when our premier fighter, the Joint Strike Fighter, set aside the weapons readiness isn't even sitting at 75%. And I don't see a path to get there.
General Brown and Commandant Berger wrote a great article on readiness and pointed out that you have to think about readiness much more broadly than we do traditionally. I have a card here with all the current availability rates for our aircraft, which aren't where I'd like them to be. But the real question is ready for what and when. And the threats are getting worse over time. There's no question about that. We do believe we have adequately ready forces today to deal with anything the National Defense Strategy would ask us to do today. Support combatant commanders.
Do you believe we have it 5 years from now? Against an increasingly lethal, as we've been repeatedly briefed?
When I said in my opening statement, we would have to make tough choices. This is partly what I was talking about. We're going to have to transition from the force we have to one that's going to be adequate to deal with the future threat. And the pacing threat is China. And it's not China everywhere in the world. It's China in the vicinity.
But I don't want to pace. I want to outmatch.
I agree with you completely.
Right. And I don't see that. And I just don't see us getting there in that budget. So I look forward to, perhaps I'll have some follow-on questions for the record of how we get there. And if we were to give you more to invest, I mean, we're out of time. You know, what we're investing in today, if you believe that we may potentially be in a conflict 5 years from now, this is it. I mean, I believe. But I look forward to working with you.
Again, we have to be concerned not just with now, not just with 5 years, but 10 and 15 years, right? So we've got to worry about all these time frames.
I feel like we're in 1936, seeing what's coming in terms of a potential conflict. And I agree with you. We have to think past it, but we have to win the next potential conflict.
My opening quote was from 1940. Another time frame of interest.
Just in the time I have remaining, General Raymond, thank you for our conversations about a potential space reserve fleet to match the civil air fleet construct. I want you to have those capabilities in a time of war to grab those civilian capabilities. I look forward to working with you on that. And then finally, General Brown, when will we get, the GAO has been making recommendations for 8 years on F-35. And most recently, they asked for a report on the reports. When will we get that report on F-35 sustainment? Because I just think frankly, it's broken in many ways. And we need to be open-eyed and honest about it, particularly as we head into NGAD. But when will we get that?
I'll have to get you an update on where we are. But to your point, though, we want to make sure that we're actually responding to those and taking the recommendations from the GAO seriously, which we are. But
they've had some sitting on the table for 8 years.
Members' time has expired.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Mr.
No more members with questions today. So Secretary Kendall, General Brown, General Raymond, this committee thanks you for appearing before us today and for your leadership of the over 500,000 Air Force active duty, Air Force Reserve, and Air National Guard members and their families who each and every day dedicate their lives in service to this nation and the greatest Air Force in the history of the world. And with that, the Committee on Armed Services is adjourned.